Can I say something?
Rob Portman deserves to be criticized for a election year conversion and very sudden flip-flop when it comes to trade. Okay. He's been pushing bad trade deals his whole career. How is this any different?
Hey,
a deeply old position.
PG, my friend, I am saying to you for the fifth time today, you have a right to criticize me for this, okay? I accept your right to criticize me for this. If you want to say it again, you can say it again. But, I mean, you're beating a dead horse.
I'm raising what I think is one of the urgent moral issues of our day.
And you've raised it, and we've raised it.
Boys, please, please. Really, this is the problem that we are experiencing in Congress today. We have men acting like boys. We don't get anything done. That's why you need a woman to come into office and say, you know what, let's compromise. This is ridiculous. You both are acting like children.
Thank you all so much for staying with us, and hopefully you all enjoyed that interview with the amazing, amazing Charles Hicklin. When I tell you, as I toured the entire state of Ohio, each and every one of the counties, Charles Hicklin was right by my side. And so, although I could have tooted his horn a little more when he was on camera, I think, he knows how much I value him, how much, I appreciate the fact that God allowed us to cross paths at New Prospect Baptist Church, and how he took me under his wing. I think one thing every young lady needs is someone outside of their immediate family who can protect, who they feel protected and who they feel safe, and who, that triple OG who will give you the game. Mr. Charles made sure that he gave me the good, the bad, and the ugly about this political game, which, I didn't know. When I first got into politics, like I said, I ran with the intentions of just doing good. I didn't realize that there were going to be loops and hoops and tricks and everything that I was going to be challenged with on this political journey. And so when I tell you that Charles Hicklin made sure that I was safe, protected, made sure that I stood my ground and I stayed down on it, that's what Charles did for me. So I really appreciate him. Charles is the amazing Mitzi Hicklin, the realtor, or I think she is a broker. Mitzi Hicklin, she's a realtor or real estate agent, and I think that you should look out for Mitzi and her real estate company, and Charles Hicklin Construction, and Mr. C's Soul Food Restaurant. So you will not be dissatisfied. So support those Black-owned businesses. Trust and believe that anywhere you see Kelli Prather, Charles Hicklin will there also be. All right, so we talked a little bit about the $127 million. $127 million that has been awarded to rebuild the Western Hills Viaduct. Finally, people don't have to feel like their life is in jeopardy as they're traveling from Central Parkway to Queen City Avenue, or from Western Avenue to Queen City, or to Central Parkway, to get to and from home, or across that viaduct to get to Interstate 75. I've traveled that pretty much all of my life because I've spent half of my life on the east side, the other half on the west side, but I've always had family on the west side. So we've traveled that monstrosity of a structure for years, and so it warms my heart to see that it is finally being refurbished, redeveloped, rehab, or whatever you want to say. The thing I really want to say is that I'm praying, although and I get the cynicism that Charles has about Black-owned businesses not getting access to the funding that's going to be available for the redevelopment of the Western Hills Viaduct. My hope and prayer is that some of that money does go back into the Black community, whether it's for subcontract work. Ideally it would be for prime contracts, but either way, the Black community is a huge part of not only Cincinnati, but also Hamilton County, and the Black community deserves some of this money. I started doing more research to see what do we need to do? What do we need to do to ensure that Black-owned businesses get a piece of the pie? I know recently UC and the African American Chamber of Commerce did a study that discussed the expansion of Black-owned business research. So they did a study to look at the expansion of Black-owned business research. Honestly, I think that, we've had the Croson study, we've had the state of Black Cincinnati, we've had the state of two cities, or a tale of two cities, Dayton and Cincinnati. And we know that, like I've said before, unfortunately, what is awarded is not actually spent, okay, regionally. And that's proven by the fact that we had to do the tale of two cities of Dayton and Cincinnati, Ohio. But prayerfully, now that you have a gubernatorial candidate who was the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, and she has, she seems to have a strong interest in Southwest Ohio. Prayerfully, some of that money, and minorities as well. I know that her running mate is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, so prayerfully, they will look at the fact that the Black-owned community has been disproportionately disenfranchised. The community as a whole has been marginalized, and it's time for us to get some reciprocity where the wealth structure is concerned. I also found another article that talked about the funds that provide $2.5 million in Cincinnati minority-owned businesses. This was on Channel 9. So there's apparently funds. There are apparently funds, $2 million in grants for Cincinnati minority-owned businesses. I'll do a deep dive into this, and I will let you know what I find. The thing that, the thing that I definitely want to talk about, and I've already said this, is that when you look at a city that is only 50% Black, and the Black business ownership is only 18%. Did you get that? When you look at a city that's 50% Black, now I think it's more like 40% Black, and the business ownership is only 18%. There are only several people who want to start and sustain their businesses and don't know how. Okay, so that was something that Alan Woods, the founder of Mortar, said. That he said that, he mentioned that Cincinnati is 50% Black. The business ownership is only 18%. But where I disagree with Mr. Woods is that there are people who want to sustain and want to acquire and sustain their businesses. Unfortunately, there are a lot of root causes that limit their ability to sustain their businesses. The one thing, and you've heard me say this, and I'm going to continue to say this, is there is discriminatory practices where the loans are concerned. All too often, Black-owned businesses have been discriminated against as it relates to community development, economic development, and mortgage lending. Oftentimes, instead of going to these major banks, these FDIC protected major banks where, although we are considered high risk, their money is insured by the federal government. All too often, instead of getting the loans that we need from these major banks, and the one bank that I'll talk about specifically is Fifth Third Bank, that settled a $60 billion lawsuit in 10 states for discriminating against Black people for community development, economic development, and mortgage lending. We are turned away. And so because we're turned away, oftentimes we are relegated to credit unions. And, I was so happy that not the previous city administration, but two city administrations before, when Charlie Winburn, who was now a part of the Civil Rights Commission, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, when he was on Cincinnati City Council, he mentioned that we needed to do away with these payday lending, these payday lending and check cashing places in all of our communities, because what was happening is they were using the payday lending and the check cashing companies as a substitute to banks, where we would have access to the resources, or to get to loans and get the resources that we need to sustain our businesses. So shout out to the previous city administration. I am very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that now that we have a new city administration in the city of Cincinnati, which happens to be the largest city in Hamilton County in this region. I'm hopeful that now we have a more positive, composed, friendlier. It seems like they're working more cohesively. There's not a lot of bickering on Cincinnati City Council. Hopefully, the people's interests will be represented. Now, for the most part, the city of Cincinnati city administration has 8 Democrats and 1 lone Republican. And so, you know, I think that Democrats understand that we have been disproportionately disenfranchised, and they're also willing to look out for the everyday person, the person who comes from those marginalized, vulnerable, and low-income communities. They're willing to look at the fact that you got people who have raised themselves up from their bootstraps and, you know, who just don't want a handout, they want a hand up. And one thing they can do is they can also hold these banks accountable. So hopefully, again, since it's a friendlier, or since the milieu is just totally different in Cincinnati City Council chambers, hopefully they can hold the banks accountable and they can get some resolve as it relates to improving the quality of life for people within the city of Cincinnati limits. The other thing that I want to talk about, and it's a cause for alarm, is the fact that there's been so many hit and run accidents. What's going on with the hit and run accidents throughout the county? Have you all noticed that there has been an uptick in the amount of hit and run accidents? I don't get it. Ironically, now I did reach out to Council Member Scotty Johnson, and I discussed one street that I've known within the city of Cincinnati. It's First Avenue, particularly between Glenway Avenue and Talbot Street. And there's also a church and an elementary school further down on First Avenue. I reached out to Scotty Johnson and said, hey, what can we do to improve the safety? Because you have people who drive recklessly up and down that street without regard to the students, without regard to the 2 Type B child care homes that are on First Avenue, without regards to the parishioners of the Catholic Church that sits down there. Hopefully we will get some resolve in the form of speed bumps on First Avenue. One of the residents on First Avenue even went out to her car, and as a result, she almost got hit because someone was driving recklessly. Now, I don't want to speculate about why they had these reckless driving patterns, but what I do know is that something needs to be done about it. And so Scotty Johnson, who is a former, I think he's a 31-year veteran from the Cincinnati Police Department, now a member of Cincinnati City Council, he is in a position to do something about it. So hopefully Scotty will take me up on the issue of doing something about the reckless driving and improving the safety, or ensuring that the citizens who live on First Avenue in Price Hill are safe. I mentioned $127 million that is going towards the Western Hills Viaduct, which is relevant to that area. Those individuals, although, you know, Price Hill needs a lot of money, because that is a neighborhood that has been subjected to a lot of blight and abandonment, deconditioned, rundown property. Now that they have developed or expanded the Mill Creek and redeveloped Lick Run Way, I'm hoping that some of the funds that were discussed in the White House by either Mayor Aftab Pureville or former state senator, president of the Greater Cincinnati African American Chamber, Senator Eric Kearney, I'm hoping that some of those funds are allocated to Price Hill for development purposes and to South Fairmount. South Fairmount is another neighborhood in the city of Cincinnati that has gone without disinvestment for years on top of years. Carl Street is pretty much flatline. I understand that they were talking about landslides in that area, and that is that is an issue, but the disinvestment has to stop. You know, if you go to more affluent neighborhoods like Hyde Park and Oakley, you see shops and stores and all sorts of developments. But sadly, in areas like South Cumminsville and Fairmount, South Fairmount, North Fairmount, Price Hill, you don't see where those neighborhoods are being paid attention to. And again, there was $1 billion infrastructure bill that was just passed, a bipartisan bill that was passed by Senator Rob Portman, and it also was signed off by our northeast senator, Senator Sherrod Brown. So hopefully some of that money will trickle down into our communities, into our neighborhoods, because, you know, the taxpayers need that money. But of course, now on the first show, and hopefully you all did enjoy that show, I appreciate the support. I got a lot of feedback via Messenger, Twitter, via Signal. So thank you all so much for supporting this broadcast. Kelli Prather and Four Shots greatly appreciate your support. But what I mentioned is that I ran for office because I was sick and tired of seeing our city and our state, to be honest, our state, especially the black community, the black and brown communities, the poor communities, go with disinvestment and be run down and blighted, and for our needs to be overlooked. And so, hopefully again, you enjoyed that broadcast. Hopefully you enjoyed the second broadcast where I talked about the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act and the issue with methamphetamines. Now, I promised you that I would talk about methamphetamines. I'm still studying this. I'm not well versed on methamphetamines, but because that show was dedicated to Paris Dismukes, and we talked about the fact that the young man who murdered Paris, we talked about the fact that it was assumed that he was on methamphetamines. So I want to talk a little bit about the short-term effects and the long-term effects of methamphetamines. Now, the short-term effects includes increased wakefulness and physical activity, faster breathing, decreased appetite, increased blood pressure, and body temperature. Some of the long-term effects are extreme weight loss. And this young man, if you saw his photo, he was extremely thin, severe dental problems, anxieties, sleeping problems, memory loss, confusion, and violent behavior, paranoia, and hallucinations. Remember, we talked about the fact that individuals who are addicted to methamphetamines, all too often, they believe they are seeing witches or being attacked by witches, or witches are telling them to commit these violent acts. I was excited to see that the Federal Bureau of Investigations is honing in on these violent acts across the nation, because this is an issue. Now, we're going from mass shootings to mass stabbings, and something needs to happen. But, I would assume that, again, because there is an increase in opioid abuse, methamphetamine abuse, people are still addicted to crack cocaine, there is an uptick in substance abuse across the board, that has a lot to do with the violent crimes. And so I go back to the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act of 2020 that was spearheaded by Senator Rob Portman. How effective was that? A question we need to ask is, how effective was the CARES Act of 2020? Interestingly enough, J.D. Vance, now J.D. Vance is a Republican who's running for the United States Senate. From my understanding, J.D. Vance brought in a pharmaceutical guru who was pushing these pills, or pushing these pills in the community. And so looking at where we are now with the violent deaths as related to methamphetamines, as related to opioids, my thing is, how effective was that, or how ineffective has that proven? Okay, I know in my mind how ineffective it has been proven, but would it make sense to put someone else who was an advocate for pill pushing back in office? We're on the cusp of an election. On November 8th, you have an opportunity to decide if we want to put J.D. Vance or Tim Ryan in office, okay? And so I think that we need to look at the whole gamut. The one thing I keep saying is that this is not about political party. We need to take an elementary approach, blend the red with the blue, come up with a purple perspective that had the people's best interests at heart. Did you get that? Take an elementary. Just make it plain. Make it make sense. Come up with a purple perspective, a political ideology that works in the highest and the best interest of the people. And so, you know, do your homework, do your research. Know if whether or not Tim Ryan, who is the establishment politician, deserves to be elected to the U.S. Senate, or J.D. Vance, who is endorsed by former President Donald Trump, who recently endorsed Governor Mike DeWine for re-election, which, I mean, you know, look at the state of Ohio and you decide who needs to be in the state house, and you also should decide who needs to be in the White House, okay? Who needs to be on Capitol Hill. So, again, I am taking a look at what we can do. I'm taking a look at immigration reform. I'm taking a look at, hey, you know what? Ozzie Davis. Look, Ozzie Davis is here. Hey, Ozzie.
Hey, Kelli.
How are you?
How you
Good, Ozzie. I'm doing my podcast, Truth and Justice.
I see you was doing your Truth and Justice.
Yes.
And that's why I came to say hi.
It is so good to see you. He has on Greg Landsman's thing. Greg Landsman is running for Congress, so Greg is a good guy. So you want to look into his campaign, and he's also supporting Bernard Mundy, right?
I am. I'm gonna go order and I'll get back.
You okay?
I'm my very best friend. I was
Yes.
the best man in this wedding.
Okay,
he
Bernard.
went to Rockdale, Walnut Hills in Miami with me. We went to school together. He ate plenty of 13s on the corner of Burning and Rockdale.
Cool. Yeah, Bernard's a good guy. Bernard, yes. J&W. And you know what? I'm happy that Ozzie brought me back. He brought me back to J&W because I want to talk about the fact that J&W, which is a staple in the community, and like Charles said that J&W is a legacy, and so he would have been remiss if he would not have put J&W Barbecue and Mr. C's Soul Food in the title of his restaurant, okay? He would have been remiss, and sadly J&W has been displaced from Burnett Avenue, okay? They have been displaced from having a restaurant on a corner of Burnett, I believe, Washington, and then they had the food truck on Burnett and Forest. So now they have a food truck on Gilbert Avenue. And my thing is this. Why is it that black-owned businesses can't get brick and mortar locations? I get it, you know, food trucks are low maintenance. You don't have to worry about the utilities. You don't have to worry about the overhead, the rent. I get that. If you own the building, you don't have to worry about the taxes. You don't have to worry about any of that, okay? But at the same time, you rarely see our counterparts, their establishments, you rarely see their business, their primary businesses operating out of food trucks or locations that are not stable. We need more stability, period. We need more stability. I'm going to continue to hone in on the fact that there are funds out here for development. There are grants out here for small businesses. We need a piece of the pie. It warmed my heart to be here with Charles Hicklin of Hicklin Construction and Mr. C's Soul Food Restaurant to bring it to you raw, to talk about what it means to be a black-owned business. Now, if I can digress just a little bit, for those of you who follow me on social media, you know that I had an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity, to attend Teslin Figueroa's Push the Line political boot camp in Atlanta, Georgia this past weekend. When I tell you it was a treat, it was a treat. Not only did I have an opportunity to network with Teslin, I also met Vanessa Harris, who is a member of Tulsa, Oklahoma City Council. I met Wes, who was a member of the Charlottesville, Virginia City Council at the time of the Charlottesville riots. I met Tay, who is one of the organizers or prime organizers for Our Black Party. When I tell you this event or this conference was jam-packed with information, it was hands down the best political boot camp that I have ever attended. If you have an opportunity to get with Teslin and her team and become a member of Push Black, the Push Black community, or our Black Party, you want to make sure you do that, because I'm telling you, if you're thinking about running for office, it will tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and it will tell you how to get in position to make a difference for your community. One of the things I really took from that experience now, as it relates to our communities, you all know that I am one of the people who fought against the closing of the Kroger in urban communities, in Black communities. You know that they pulled Kroger out of Walnut Hills. They pulled Kroger out of College Hill years ago. They pulled Kroger from Vine Street in OTR when it was a predominantly African American community, and put it down on Court Street so that the attorneys and the people who live closer to the banks can have access to a grocer. I take issue with that. The reason I take issue with that is because it deprives poor, vulnerable, marginalized communities from getting fresh vegetation, fresh water. And so what we have to do, and Vanessa, who is a member of the Tulsa, Oklahoma City Council, what she pointed out was the fact that she went head to head with the dollar stores, because what they're doing is they are proliferating, the dollar stores are proliferating in poor communities, and as a result, we are getting outdated produce, outdated bread, outdated juices and water. And it's just, it is indicative of the fact that when they pull the resources out of our community, meaning they take the banks, they put, what do they put? They put payday lending companies, and they put check cashing companies, and they put these bodegas with outdated food in these dollar stores in our community. They are contributing, not only contributing to the wealth disparities, but also the economic disparities, and this is an issue. So you all know that Kelli Prather tend to get on her soapbox and talk about the issues. That's why we got to get the right people in position who are going to represent our highest and best interests, because it's unconscionable what we have been subjected to. So on the next episode of Truth and Justice with Kelli Prather, I'm going to be broadcasting live from another local Black-owned business, and I will allow them to share their story. But if you're not registered to vote, I think the deadline to vote in the state of Ohio is October 10th. I would say you want to register to vote by October 1st. That's my deadline for you, to register to vote. Register to vote by October 1st, because what is going to happen on November 2nd is we're going to elect a state senator. We're going to elect state senators. We're going to elect members of Congress. We're going to elect state representatives. We're going to elect judges like Bernard Mundy, who is a good friend of O.Z. Davis. We're going to elect Raquel Howard Smith to juvenile court. And so these are my picks. These are definitely my picks for judge. So I can't tell you who to vote for, but I'm just telling you who I support. I support Raquel Howard Smith because Raquel Howard Smith has been through the trenches. She grew up in the city. She understands that it's about our babies. And so we don't want to politicize our babies. We want to make it about ensuring that we lay a foundation, a strong foundation where they are safe, they are protected, and their quality of life is up to par, so that they can live healthy, happy, and productive lives. So thank you all so much for tuning into this edition of Truth and Justice with Kelli Prather. It was my pleasure to bring you my friend, my road manager, Charles Hicklin, the sole proprietor of Mr. C's Soul Food right here at 5646 Montgomery Road. If you have construction needs, now, I challenge you all to come here and see what Mr. Hicklin, Charles Hicklin did to this place. This place was a shack. He brought it all the way back. He pulled that food truck from the lot and redeveloped the spot so that it is nice. It passed all of its inspections. The grand opening is today. That's why I'm here. But I want to send a very special shout out to Charles Hicklin of Hicklin Construction, Charles Hicklin of Mr. C's Soul Food, Mitzi Hicklin, the real estate agent / broker, who is doing great things, and she's also a fellow Tiger. Shout out to Mitzi Hicklin, the Withrow Tiger, Tiger Pride.
As always, I love your grace, faith, and peace. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.